October 9th, 1965, 4:12 p.m. Thomas Brown is walking with his two children, ages 3 and 5, along a pathway near the Calder and Hebble Canal in Wakefield, England. His dog runs ahead, tail wagging, enjoying the autumn afternoon. The sun is starting to dip lower in the sky. There's a chill in the air. They're approaching a place locals call the ABC Tunnel. 26 stone steps lead down an embankment to a short tunnel that runs beneath a railway line. The steps are numbered 1 through 26, like the alphabet, A through Z. That's why children call it the ABC steps. Brown's children want to go down. They like counting the steps. 1, 2, 3. The dog reaches the bottom first. It starts barking, not the playful bark, the other kind. Brown tells his children to wait at the top. Something's wrong. He can feel it. He walks down. 15 steps, 20 steps, 24. At the bottom, near the tunnel entrance, there's a shape, a person, a girl. She's crouched in an awkward position, half kneeling, her left arm resting on the second step. Her head is on her arm. Her right arm is above her head, on the next step, as if she'd been trying to climb. Her legs are folded beneath her. She's wearing a red quilted coat. It's soaking wet, but it hasn't rained. Brown moves closer. "What's wrong?" he calls out. No response. He gets his hands under her armpits and lifts her up, trying to help her to her feet. Her body is warm but limp. That's when he sees it. The red on her coat isn't just the color of the fabric. It's blood, fresh blood, everywhere. Her white blouse underneath is drenched. Her yellow jumper is saturated. Blood is pooling on the stone steps. "I did not realize she was as badly injured as she was," Brown will tell police later, his voice shaking. His children are at the top of the embankment watching. He tries to get them to go home. They won't leave. More people arrive. Someone runs to call an ambulance. Someone else calls the police. The girl's sailing teacher, John Blackburn, arrives and recognizes her immediately. 14-year-old Elsie Frost. He'd seen her less than half an hour ago, helping younger children at the sailing club. She'd been smiling, full of life, talking about school. Now she's dying at the bottom of 26 stone steps. An ambulance arrives, but there's nothing they can do. Elsie Frost is dead. She was stabbed 5 times, twice in the head, twice in the back, once in the hand as she tried to defend herself. The fatal wound pierced her heart. She fought back. She struggled through a 30-foot tunnel while bleeding to death. She made it to the bottom of the ABC steps before collapsing. She was just 14 years old. And the man who killed her? He walked away that afternoon and murdered again 7 years later. This is the story of how police got it wrong, how they accused an innocent man and destroyed his life, how a killer hid in plain sight for over 50 years. This is the story of Elsie Frost. What you're about to hear didn't make international headlines, but it should have. The evidence police destroyed. The alibi notebooks an innocent man kept for 50 years because one accusation ruined his entire life. The storage units filled with a killer's trophies that sat unopened for decades. We expose cases like this every day, where the system fails victims, where families fight for justice, while the guilty walk free. Hit subscribe right now, because when the next miscarriage of justice happens, when the next family spends decades searching for answers, you'll be the first to know what really happened. Don't let them control what you see. Wakefield, West Yorkshire, England, 1965. A working-class city in the north of England, built on coal mining and textiles. The kind of place where neighbors knew each other, where children played in the streets until dark, where people didn't lock their doors because crime was something that happened in London, not here. The Calder and Hebble Canal runs through Wakefield, a relic from the Industrial Revolution, when canals moved coal and wool across Yorkshire. By the 1960s, the canal was quieter, used more for leisure than industry. Along its banks were walking paths, bridges, tunnels that went under railway lines. Near the canal was a former sand quarry, filled with water, that locals called the Horbury Lagoon. On weekends, teenagers learned to sail there. It was wholesome, supervised, the kind of activity parents encouraged. Fresh air and skill building. The weather on October 9th, 1965, was typical for autumn in Yorkshire. Cool but not freezing, cloudy with breaks of sun, the kind of day where you'd wear a jumper and a coat, but could still enjoy being outside. Manor Hay Road, where the Frost family lived, was a respectable working-class street. Row houses with small gardens, families who'd lived there for generations. Everyone knew the Frosts. Arthur Frost worked for the railway. His wife Edith stayed home with their 3 children. They were a close, loving family. church on Sundays, dinner together every night, the kind of family where everyone looked out for each other. This was a community where a 14-year-old girl could walk to a sailing club on a Saturday afternoon and her parents wouldn't worry, where danger was an abstract concept, something that happened to other people in other places. October 9th, 1965, changed that forever. After that day, parents in Wakefield would hold their children a little tighter. They'd warn them about strangers, about walking alone, about shortcuts through tunnels. Because if Elsie Frost could be murdered in broad daylight on a Saturday afternoon, then no one was safe. Comment the exact time you're watching this right now. I need to see how many people are watching this past midnight, how many are watching during the day, then drop your location below. And if you've ever been to Wakefield, if you know the Calder and Hebble Canal, if you've walked those paths where Elsie died, comment, I know this place. The reason why will become clear in the next few minutes when you realize how a killer exploited these exact locations to get away with murder, and how the police failure in this Yorkshire town allowed him to kill again. Elsie Frost was born on April 1st, 1951, making her 14 years old in October 1965. She was the middle child. Her older sister, Anne, was 18, already married with a baby of her own. Her younger brother, Colin, was just 6 years old, the baby of the family, who adored his big sister. Elsie attended Snapethorpe High School in Wakefield. She was a prefect, a student given responsibility to help maintain order and set an example. More than that, she'd just been chosen to be the next head girl, the highest honor a student could receive. It meant the teachers trusted her, respected her, or saw leadership potential in her. But Elsie wasn't one of those students who succeeds at the expense of being liked. She was popular, she had a good circle of friends, she was the kind of girl who remembered everyone's birthday, who'd share her lunch if someone forgot theirs, who made new students feel welcome. She wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. She'd already started thinking about which subjects she might teach, which age groups she'd work with. Education mattered to her. She worked hard at school, brought home good marks, made her parents proud. At 14, Elsie hadn't had a boyfriend yet. She was interested in boys the way most 14-year-olds are, giggly conversations with friends, wondering who liked who, but she wasn't dating anyone. Her focus was on school, on friends, on activities like sailing. Sailing was Elsie's passion. Most Saturdays she'd go to the Horbury Lagoon with friends, learning to navigate the small boats, feeling the wind catch the sails, the freedom of being on the water. She'd gotten good enough that adults asked her to help supervise younger children. She was responsible, patient, good with kids. She was the kind of teenager parents point to when they want to encourage their own children. Look at Elsie Frost, they'd say. That's a girl with her head on straight. On the morning of October 9th, 1965, Elsie woke up in the bedroom she'd slept in her entire life. She had breakfast with her family. She told her mother, Edith, that she'd be going sailing that afternoon, helping out at the club. She got dressed for the cold weather, a white blouse, a yellow jumper, a printed cotton skirt, and her favorite piece of clothing, a red quilted anorak, bright and cheerful. She also put on a brand new pair of shoes. She was particular about keeping them clean, not wanting to scuff them or get them muddy. She packed her sailing clothes in a duffel bag. She hugged her little brother, Colin. She kissed her mother goodbye. I'll be home by tea time, she said. It was the last time her family would see her alive. October 9th, 1965. The timeline of Elsie Frost's last hours. Elsie left her home on Manor Hay Road sometime around mid-afternoon. The walk to the Horbury Lagoon wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes on foot. She'd made this walk dozens of times. She knew the route by heart. She arrived at the sailing club and reported to John Blackburn, a teacher who ran the Saturday sessions. Blackburn was glad to see her. They needed responsible older students to help with the younger children who were just learning. Elsie spent the afternoon on the water and at the lakeside, showing 8- and 9-year-olds how to tie knots, how to position the sail to catch wind, how to sit in the boat to maintain balance. She was good at it, patient, encouraging. The younger children liked her. The session was supposed to end around 4:00 p.m. Parents would be arriving to collect their children. The air was getting colder as the sun dropped lower. Elsie changed out of her sailing clothes, back into her street clothes, with the red coat and the new shoes. She said goodbye to John Blackburn and the other students. She left the lagoon between 3:50 p.m. and 4:00 p.m. There were several routes she could have taken home. The most direct was along the canal towpath, through a tunnel that went under the railway line. But this tunnel was partially flooded. Recent rain had left puddles of muddy water on the ground. Elsie looked at her new shoes. She didn't want to ruin them, walking through muddy water. She decided to take a different route, a detour that would keep her shoes clean. It was the worst decision of her life. Instead of the main tunnel, Elsie walked toward what locals called the ABC tunnel, a shorter tunnel, only about 30 feet long, that also went under the railway line. To reach it, you had to walk down 26 stone steps. The ABC steps so named because there were as many steps as letters in the alphabet. Elsie had walked this route before. It wasn't unknown to her. It was just less common, used when the main tunnel was flooded, or if you were approaching from a different direction. She walked alone. Her friends had gone a different way, taking the main tunnel despite the water. Elsie was by herself. She reached the top of the ABC steps around 4:05 p.m., based on later police calculations. She started walking down. The steps were steep, uneven in places, worn smooth by decades of feet. You had to watch where you stepped. She made it about halfway down. Step 13, step 14, step 15. Someone was in the tunnel at the bottom, waiting. We don't know if Elsie saw him before she started down the steps. We don't know if she hesitated, if some instinct told her something was wrong. We don't know if she considered turning back. What we know is that she kept walking. She reached the bottom of the steps. She entered the 30-foot tunnel, and that's where he attacked her. The post-mortem would later determine that the first blow came from behind. A knife plunged into her back. Elsie screamed. She spun around to face her attacker. He stabbed her again, and again, twice in the head. The blows were savage, frenzied, the kind of wounds that come from someone consumed by rage. Elsie threw up her hand to defend herself. The knife went through her palm. 5 stab wounds in total. One of them pierced her heart. But Elsie Frost didn't die in that tunnel. Bleeding, terrified, in unimaginable pain, she did something extraordinary. She fought back. She pushed past her attacker, and she ran. The trail of blood told the story. Elsie made it through the entire 30-foot tunnel. She emerged on the other side. She tried to climb the ABC steps, desperate to reach the top, to reach help, to get away from the man who was killing her. She made it to step 2, maybe step 3. Then her body gave out. She collapsed, her left arm on the second step, her head resting on her arm, her right arm reaching up towards step 3, still trying to climb even as consciousness faded. That's where Thomas Brown found her at 4:12 p.m., 7 minutes after she'd been attacked, 7 minutes too late to save her. The man who stabbed her had disappeared. He'd walked away from the ABC tunnel, probably going back up the embankment the same way he'd come. He would have been covered in blood, Elsie's blood, but if he'd prepared, if he'd worn a coat he could remove, if he'd chosen his route carefully, he could have avoided being seen. And that's exactly what he did. Because by the time police arrived, secured the scene, started searching the area, Elsie Frost's killer was gone. By 4:30 p.m., the ABC steps and tunnel were swarming with police officers. This was 1965. There was no DNA testing, no CCTV cameras, no cell phone records. Criminal investigations relied on witnesses, physical evidence like fingerprints and blood types, and old-fashioned detective work. The scene told a clear story. Elsie had been attacked in the tunnel and had somehow made it to the steps before dying. The blood trail proved this. The positioning of her body confirmed it. But why? Why would someone murder a 14-year-old girl on a Saturday afternoon in a public place? The first theory was sexual assault. Young women and girls were often targeted by sexual predators. But the post-mortem examination revealed that Elsie had not been sexually assaulted. Her clothing, aside from being soaked in blood, had not been disturbed. There was no evidence of attempted rape. So if not sexual assault, what was the motive? Robbery? Elsie was carrying her duffel bag with her sailing clothes. The bag was found near her body, contents intact. She had a small amount of pocket money in her coat. It was still there. Nothing had been stolen. A personal grudge? Elsie was 14 years old. She didn't have enemies. She hadn't been in fights with anyone. There were no jealous ex-boyfriends because she'd never had a boyfriend. Her friends and family couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt her. The savagery of the attack troubled investigators. 5 stab wounds, 2 to the head, delivered with enough force to penetrate the skull. This wasn't a mugging gone wrong. This was rage, hatred. The killer had wanted Elsie dead. But why? Police began the painstaking process of building a timeline. They retraced Elsie's movements from the moment she left home to the moment she was found. They interviewed everyone at the sailing club. They established that she'd left between 3:50 p.m. and 4 p.m., giving a tight window for when the attack occurred. They searched for the murder weapon. They brought in the army to assist. They combed through bushes, dragged the canal, checked bins and drains. The knife was never found. The killer had taken it with him. They went door to door in the surrounding area, questioning every man who lived nearby. 12,000 men in total. They took thousands of witness statements. They asked people where they were that afternoon, what they'd seen, who they'd been with. Several people reported seeing men near the ABC steps around the relevant time, but the descriptions were vague, contradictory. One witness thought they saw a man in dark clothing. Another remembered a man in a light coat. A third saw two men together. In 1965, without CCTV, without the ability to check phone locations or digital footprints, police relied heavily on witness testimony. And witness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially when people are trying to remember details from hours earlier about strangers they barely noticed. The investigation attracted massive media attention. Newspapers across Britain covered the story. 14-year-old girl stabbed to death. Wakefield murder shocks community. Police hunt killer of teenage girl. The Frost family was devastated. Elsie's mother Edith required medical sedation. So did her father Arthur. They couldn't comprehend what had happened. Their daughter had gone sailing on a Saturday afternoon. How was she dead? 18-year-old Anne, Elsie's older sister, found their parents lying in bed, unable to cope with the horror. 6-year-old Colin had been taken to stay with neighbors, then with an uncle. He was too young to fully understand, but he knew his sister was gone and his parents were broken. The community rallied around the Frost family, but there was also fear. If a teenage girl could be murdered in broad daylight, were their own children safe? Parents started accompanying their children everywhere. Girls were told not to walk alone. The ABC steps, once an innocuous shortcut, became a place parents warned their children to avoid. As weeks passed without an arrest, frustration grew. Police were working around the clock, but had no solid leads. Witnesses had been interviewed. The scene had been processed. But without a clear suspect, the investigation was stalling. Then came a break. Several witnesses mentioned seeing a man near the ABC steps that afternoon, a man they recognized, a local man who lived in the area. His name was Ian Spencer. The police in 1965 counted on people staying quiet. They counted on people accepting their conclusions without question. They counted on communities being so desperate for answers that they'd believe anyone the authorities accused, even without evidence. If you believe police should have to prove guilt beyond doubt, if you believe an innocent man's life shouldn't be destroyed because investigators need someone to blame, hit subscribe right now. Only people who think false accusations are acceptable, who believe convenience matters more than truth, won't. Show that the world is watching, that we don't forget miscarriages of justice. Subscribe. Ian Bernard Spencer was 33 years old in October 1965. He was married with a young child. He worked as a former railway fireman and laborer. He lived in the Wakefield area not far from the ABC tunnel. On the afternoon of October 9th, 1965, Ian Spencer had been in the vicinity of the Calder and Hebble Canal. He'd been walking, getting some fresh air on his day off. He'd passed near the ABC steps area. When police questioned him, Spencer was cooperative. He told them exactly where he'd been and when. He stated clearly that he'd arrived home at least 45 minutes before Elsie was murdered. His wife confirmed this. So did his mother-in-law. So did a family friend. But other witnesses weren't so sure. When shown a photograph of Spencer, some said they thought they'd seen him near the ABC steps closer to 4:00 p.m. They weren't certain. It had been hours ago. They'd barely paid attention at the time, but they thought it might have been him. In 2025, this wouldn't be enough for an accusation. We have GPS data, time-stamped phone records, CCTV footage, digital breadcrumbs that can establish exactly where someone was to the minute. In 1965, they had people's memories and best guesses, and based on those memories and best guesses, the coroner's inquest decided Ian Spencer had murdered Elsie Frost. On January 11, 1966, 3 months after Elsie's death, a coroner's jury reached their verdict. They ruled unanimously that there was a prima facie case against Ian Bernard Spencer. This was devastating. In 1966, a coroner's inquest had the power to accuse a named person of murder. The jury could point at someone and say, "We believe you did this." Modern inquests can only establish facts and cause of death. They cannot accuse individuals. This power was removed precisely because of cases like Spencer's, where accusations were made without the evidentiary standards required in criminal trials. But in January 1966, the law allowed it, and Ian Spencer's life was destroyed. The next day, January 12th, Newspapers across Britain ran the headline, "Elsie, man accused of murder." Spencer was arrested and charged. He was held in prison for 8 weeks and 2 days awaiting trial. His wife stood by him. His mother-in-law maintained he'd been home when Elsie was killed. The family friend confirmed Spencer's alibi, but none of them were called to testify at the inquest. The jury made their decision based on the uncertain recollections of witnesses who'd seen someone who might have been Spencer near the ABC steps. When Spencer's case finally reached the magistrate's court, the evidence against him fell apart. The magistrates found no case to answer. There simply wasn't enough proof that Spencer had committed the murder. The case went to a higher court, the equivalent of the modern Crown Court. The judge reviewed the evidence and instructed the jury to return a not guilty verdict. There was no case. The prosecution couldn't prove Spencer had killed Elsie Frost. In March 1966, Ian Spencer was released from prison. He'd been cleared, officially exonerated, found not guilty, but mud sticks. For the rest of his life, Ian Spencer would be that man who was accused of murdering that girl. Never mind that he was innocent. Never mind that the court had found no case against him. In the court of public opinion, an accusation is almost as damaging as a conviction. Spencer's life became consumed by proving his innocence over and over again. Every time there was another murder in the region, police would visit Ian Spencer. They'd question him. Where were you on this date? What were you doing? Can you prove it? Spencer realized he needed to document his every movement. If he couldn't prove where he'd been, he'd be suspected of every crime that happened in Yorkshire. So he started keeping notebooks, detailed alibi notebooks. Every day, Spencer wrote down where he went, what time he left his house, what time he returned, who he spoke to, what he did. If he drove his car, he recorded the exact mileage before and after each trip. He filled notebook after notebook with this information, page after page of dates, times, locations. A complete record of his life maintained obsessively so that when police came calling again, he could prove he wasn't responsible. He kept these notebooks for decades, long into his retirement, only stopping when a series of strokes left him unable to write and he was moved into residential care. Imagine living like that. Imagine knowing that one false accusation had branded you for life, that you could never relax, never stop documenting your every move, because at any moment someone might accuse you again. Ian Spencer's son, Lee Spencer, would later describe how his father's accusation never left him over the last 50 years. The wrong man's life was ruined. And the right man, the man who actually killed Elsie Frost, he walked free. After Ian Spencer was cleared, the investigation into Elsie Frost's murder went cold. Police had no other viable suspects. The extensive questioning of 12,000 men had turned up nothing concrete. The murder weapon had never been found. Physical evidence was limited. In the late 1960s, the case file was eventually closed. It remained unsolved. Elsie's mother, Edith, died in 1988, never knowing who killed her daughter. Her father, Arthur, died in 2003, also without answers. 23 years without justice. 38 years without justice. The years mounted. But Elsie's siblings, Anne and Colin, never stopped pushing for answers. Anne, Elsie's older sister, who'd been 18 when her little sister was murdered, sent an email to the BBC in 2015. She explained what had happened to Elsie. She asked if they could help bring attention to the case. The BBC agreed. They produced an investigative radio documentary called Who Killed Elsie Frost? It aired on BBC Radio 4 in 2015, 50 years after the murder. The response was immediate and significant. New information flooded in from listeners who remembered details, who'd kept quiet for decades, who'd always wondered about certain things they'd seen or heard. This new information was enough to convince West Yorkshire Police to reopen the case. In 2015, a cold case team of 14 officers was assigned to review everything from scratch. But there was a problem, a massive problem. Police in 1965 hadn't anticipated DNA testing. They hadn't imagined that decades later, technology would exist to extract genetic profiles from minute traces of biological material. They hadn't kept Elsie's clothing, her red coat, soaked in blood, which almost certainly contained DNA from her attacker. Gone, destroyed, discarded years earlier when storage space was needed for more recent cases. Her white blouse, her yellow jumper, all gone. Any physical evidence that could have definitively identified the killer through DNA was lost forever. It gets worse. Most of the original case files had also been destroyed. Police reports, witness statements, photographs. Much of the paperwork from 1965 no longer existed. And here's something still unexplained. The file on Elsie's murder at the National Archives, where historical documents are kept, has been sealed until 2060. No one knows why. No explanation has been given for why this particular case file has been closed for nearly a century. What were police hiding? What was in that file that couldn't be made public? We still don't know. The cold case team worked with what they had. They re-interviewed witnesses who were still alive. They looked at the new information that had come in after the BBC documentary. They searched for connections, patterns, anything that might point to the killer. Then on September 27, 2016 came a breakthrough. A 78-year-old man was arrested in connection with Elsie Frost's death. He was questioned and subsequently bailed while police built their case. On March 6, 2017, he was re-arrested, not just for Elsie's murder, but also for an unconnected allegation of rape and kidnap from 1972. The cold case team had found their suspect. On March 25, 2018, news reports finally named him publicly. His name was Peter Pickering, also known as the Beast of Wombwell, and Peter Pickering had been on police radar since 1965. Peter Pickering wasn't an unknown. He wasn't some shadowy figure who'd escaped police attention for 50 years. He'd been identified as a suspect in Elsie Frost's murder just 4 days after she died. 4 days. On October 13, 1965, Scotland Yard sent a file on Pickering to the West Yorkshire Police Investigation Team. The file detailed Pickering's history. At the time of Elsie's murder, Pickering was wanted for 2 sexual assaults. He was considered dangerous. His home in Wombwell, a town near Barnsley not far from Wakefield, was under 24-hour surveillance. Police had eyes on Pickering's house. They were watching to see when he'd return so they could arrest him. But they made a critical error. During the surveillance, officers observed someone entering and exiting Pickering's house. They assumed it was Pickering's mother or another family member. It was actually Pickering himself, dressed as a woman. Pickering had disguised himself in women's clothing to evade surveillance. And it worked. Police didn't realize the person they were watching was their suspect. By law, they couldn't enter the house without a warrant or without seeing Pickering enter first. So they waited and watched while Pickering moved freely in and out of his own home, hidden in plain sight. By the time police finally hunted Pickering down and arrested him for the sexual assaults he was wanted for, something else had happened. The coroner's inquest had accused Ian Spencer of murdering Elsie Frost. With Spencer identified as the killer, police saw no reason to pursue Pickering for Elsie's death. They had their man, or so they thought. Pickering was never questioned about Elsie Frost. The Scotland Yard file was filed away. The surveillance failure was forgotten. And Peter Pickering was free to continue his predatory behavior. On August 15, 1972, nearly 7 years after Elsie's murder, Pickering abducted an 18-year-old woman. He raped her. He kept her captive. On August 23, 1972, 8 days later, Pickering abducted 14-year-old Shirley Boldy in Wombwell. He sexually assaulted her. Then he strangled her to death and dumped her body. Shirley Boldy was the same age Elsie Frost had been, 14 years old. Pickering was arrested, tried, and convicted of Shirley Boldy's manslaughter. He was sentenced to life in prison. He would spend more than 40 years behind bars. But he was never charged with Elsie Frost's murder. That case remained officially unsolved until 2015, when the cold case team started digging deeper into Pickering's history. Look at what the police failure in 1965 caused. Look at how Peter Pickering was identified as a suspect 4 days after Elsie died, but was never questioned because they'd already blamed Ian Spencer. Look at how an 18-year-old woman was raped, and a 14-year-old girl, Shirley Boldy, was murdered because investigators were too invested in the wrong man. If you believe police should investigate all suspects, not just the convenient ones. If you believe that Shirley Boldy deserved better, comment, "The system failed them," right now. Let this miscarriage of justice be remembered. West Yorkshire police allowed a killer to walk free and kill again. Only those who excuse institutional failure will stay silent. Prove you're better. Comment below. When the cold case team made the connection to Peter Pickering in 2015, they began building a comprehensive case against him. Pickering was already in prison serving his life sentence for Shirley Boldy's manslaughter. He'd been behind bars since 1972, but the cold case team wanted to charge him with Elsie Frost's murder as well. They needed evidence. And without Elsie's clothing or physical evidence from the scene, they had to find another way to connect Pickering to the crime. They discovered that Pickering had maintained 2 storage units for decades. One in Sheffield, one in Liverpool, units he'd rented under his own name and had kept paying for, even while in prison. Police obtained warrants to search the storage units. What they found was a killer's archive. The units were filled with suitcases. Inside the suitcases, handcuffs, women's underwear, diaries, letters, paintings, exercise books, and documents. Decades' worth of materials that Pickering had kept, preserved, unable to let go of. Among these documents were items that directly implicated him in Elsie Frost's murder. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a letter Pickering had written to a girlfriend. This girlfriend lived just minutes away from where Elsie Frost had been murdered. She had broken up with Pickering shortly before Elsie's death. The letter had never been sent. Pickering had kept it all these years. In the letter he wrote, "You have caused me to do what I'm about to do. You watch what happens next. I will surely go down in flames this time. I shall have to take someone with me when I go. So now what, to join the devil? Now I'm really going to get good and bloody nasty, thanks to you." The letter was dated early October 1965. Days after the letter was written, Elsie Frost was stabbed to death. The cold case team also discovered that Pickering had conspired with his mother to create a false alibi for the day Elsie was murdered. Detective Superintendent Nick Wallen explained. He conspired with his mother to create an alibi. He wrote to her saying, "Get that doctor to say I'm in bed with the flu and get him to sign it if police ever come calling." Pickering's mother had followed through. She'd gotten their family doctor to sign a false statement saying Peter Pickering had been home sick with flu on October 9th, 1965. The doctor, who has since died, had lied for Pickering. This false alibi had helped keep Pickering off police radar while they focused on Ian Spencer. The evidence was overwhelming. The unsent letter, the false alibi, Pickering's history of violence against young women, the fact that he'd been wanted for sexual assaults at the exact time of Elsie's murder. Detective Superintendent Wallen told the eventual inquest, "Peter Pickering, in my view, is a homicidal maniac. I'm absolutely convinced that he killed her. We never thought we would have identified a suspect. That suspect was alive, and we get that suspect to the doors of the Crown Court before he died." On March 6, 2017, Pickering was rearrested while serving his life sentence. He was informed that police intended to charge him with the murder of Elsie Frost. For 52 years, Pickering had gotten away with Elsie's murder. Now, finally, he would face justice. Except he didn't. On March 24, 2018, one day before his name was publicly released, Peter Pickering died in a secure hospital. He was 80 years old, he'd been in poor health, and he died before he could stand trial for Elsie Frost's murder. The Crown Prosecution Service confirmed they'd been preparing to charge him. They'd reviewed the evidence. They believed they could secure a conviction, but you can't prosecute a dead man. Detective Superintendent Wallen said, "I'm desperately sad that Peter Pickering did not stand trial." Elsie's brother Colin said, "He got away with murder, but there was still one avenue for justice, one way to officially establish what had happened and clear Ian Spencer's name once and for all, a new coroner's inquest." Elsie's siblings, Anne and Colin, now in their 70s and 60s respectively, lobbied the Attorney General for a new inquest. They'd been cheated and robbed of a jury trial by Pickering's death, they said. But a new inquest would be the next best thing. It would officially examine the evidence against Pickering and, hopefully, clear Ian Spencer's name after 54 years of suspicion. Their request was granted. In 2019, 54 years after Elsie's murder, a new coroner's inquest was held. The inquest heard evidence from the cold case investigation team. Detective Superintendent Nick Wallen presented the findings, the letters from the storage units, the false alibi, Pickering's history of violence, the Scotland Yard file from October 1965 showing he'd been a suspect from the very beginning. The inquest heard how the 1965 police investigation had failed, how they'd surveilled Pickering's house but didn't recognize him in disguise, how they'd been given his name 4 days after the murder but never followed up once Ian Spencer had been accused, how those failures had left Pickering free to rape an 18-year-old woman and murder 14-year-old Shirley Boldy in 1972. The inquest heard testimony about Pickering's obsession with Elsie's case. Documents in the storage units showed he'd kept newspaper clippings about her murder. He'd written about the case. He'd been consumed by it for decades. Coroner Kevin McLaughlin stated during the inquest, "Mr. Pickering, it seems, was absorbed by Elsie Frost's murder. He has been exposed as a devious man. The picture that emerges is that Mr. Pickering was a dangerous man as far as young women were concerned. The coroner was legally unable to formally name Pickering as Elsie's killer. Only criminal trials can determine guilt, but he made the conclusions clear. McLaughlin added, Mr. Pickering has spent over 40 years in custody. He served a life sentence literally. Mr. Colin Frost said he had got away with murder, but considering he spent the best part of his adult life in custody, it seems to me that Pickering did not get away with much. The inquest also officially exonerated Ian Spencer. Spencer had died before the new inquest took place. He'd lived his entire adult life under the shadow of a murder accusation. He'd kept his alibi notebooks until a stroke made it impossible. He'd been visited and questioned by police every time another crime occurred in Yorkshire. He'd been innocent all along. And now finally, officially, the record showed it. But Spencer never got to hear those words. He died without his name being fully cleared. His son Lee Spencer attended the inquest. He listened to the evidence against Pickering. He heard the coroner's conclusions. He watched as the system that had destroyed his father's life finally acknowledged its mistake. It never left him over the last 50 years, Lee said of his father's false accusation. Now people know he was innocent. It's too late for him to hear it, but at least the truth is out there. The Elsie Frost case is resolved in the sense that we know who killed her. Peter Pickering. The evidence is overwhelming. But questions remain. Why did Pickering target Elsie specifically? Was it random? Pickering had just been dumped by a girlfriend who lived near where Elsie was murdered. His letter suggested he was going to take someone with me when I go, indicating he'd already planned to kill someone. But was Elsie chosen because she happened to be there? Or had Pickering been watching the ABC tunnel waiting for a victim? We'll never know. Pickering died without confessing, without explaining his actions. How did he evade the blood evidence? Elsie was stabbed 5 times. There would have been significant blood spray. Pickering would have been covered in blood, yet no witnesses reported seeing someone covered in blood walking away from the ABC steps. The theory is that Pickering wore outer clothing he could quickly remove and hide. The tunnel itself could have provided brief cover for him to strip off a bloodied jacket, bundle it up, and walk away, appearing clean. But where did he dispose of this clothing? It was never found. Did he burn it, bury it, throw it in the canal? The murder weapon was never recovered either. What happened to the knife? Why is the National Archives file sealed until 2060? This remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. What's in that file that requires it to be locked away for nearly a century? Some speculate it contains embarrassing details about the police investigation's failures. Others wonder if there were additional suspects who were never pursued. The truth won't be known until 2060, by which time everyone involved in the original investigation will be long dead. Could Elsie have been saved if police had properly identified Pickering during the surveillance? If they'd realized the person in women's clothing was their suspect, they could have arrested him immediately after Elsie's murder. Would they have found evidence on him? Blood-stained clothing, the murder weapon? Would they have been able to charge him? And most importantly, would Shirley Boldy still be alive if police had caught Pickering in 1965? This question haunts everyone involved in the cold case investigation. Shirley Boldy was 14 years old when Pickering murdered her in 1972. That's 7 years after Elsie died. 7 years that Pickering was free because police had blamed Ian Spencer instead. Shirley deserved better. Her family deserved better. The system failed them catastrophically. Peter Pickering wanted Elsie Frost forgotten. He kept trophies in storage units, but never confessed. He let an innocent man take the blame and lived with his secret for 50 years. If you believe Elsie mattered, if you believe we must remember, so cases like this are never mishandled again, smash that like button and subscribe. Killers like Pickering depend on time erasing their crimes, on cases going cold, on families giving up. Prove him wrong. Anne and Colin fought for 54 years for justice for their sister. Like if you believe their fight mattered. Only those who think cold cases should stay buried will refuse. Subscribe right now. Show that no matter how many decades pass, we don't forget. The Elsie Frost case is a tragedy on multiple levels. First, obviously, is Elsie herself, a 14-year-old girl with her entire life ahead of her. Head girl material, future teacher, kind, responsible, loved by everyone who knew her. She made one small decision to avoid muddy water to keep her new shoes clean, and it cost her everything. She deserved to graduate from school, to have a career, to fall in love, get married, have children, to grow old. Instead, she died terrified and in pain at the bottom of 26 stone steps, murdered by a stranger for reasons that made sense only to him. Second is her family. Her parents died without knowing who killed their daughter. Imagine living 38 years knowing someone murdered your child and never being caught, never having answers, never having justice. Anne and Colin fought for decades to reopen the investigation. They refused to let Elsie be forgotten. Their persistence eventually led to Pickering being identified, but it came too late for their parents to see. Third is Ian Spencer, an innocent man whose life was destroyed by a false accusation, who spent 50 years documenting his every movement because one coroner's jury had pointed at him and said murderer. Spencer's case exemplifies why the law was changed to prevent coroners' inquests from naming suspects. Accusations without the evidentiary standards of criminal trials can ruin lives. Spencer was found not guilty, but he was never free of the accusation. Fourth is Shirley Boldy and the 18-year-old rape victim, two young women whose lives were destroyed because police failed to properly investigate Peter Pickering in 1965. If they'd caught him then, if they'd pursued the Scotland Yard lead, if they'd recognized him during surveillance, Shirley might still be alive. The system failed her. The system failed her family, and that failure is unforgivable. The case also highlights the importance of preserving evidence. The decision to discard Elsie's blood-stained clothing, which almost certainly contained Pickering's DNA, meant the cold case team had to build their case on circumstantial evidence and documents. If that clothing had been kept, DNA testing could have definitively proven Pickering's guilt in minutes. Modern police forces now understand the importance of evidence retention. They keep samples from unsolved cases indefinitely, knowing that technology advances and cold cases can be solved decades later. But in 1965, no one imagined DNA testing, and Elsie's evidence was destroyed. The case changed how British police handle miscarriages of justice. The power of coroners to accuse named individuals was removed. Standards for witness testimony were raised. The dangers of tunnel vision, focusing on one suspect while ignoring others, became part of investigator training. Ian Spencer's nightmare helped change the system, even if it came too late for him. For the Frost family, the 2019 inquest provided some closure, not justice in the traditional sense. Pickering didn't stand trial, didn't go to prison specifically for Elsie's murder, but they know who killed their sister. They know Ian Spencer was innocent. They know the truth. Colin Frost, who was just 6 years old when Elsie died, has spoken about how the murder has affected him his entire life. "I lost my sister when I was 6, he said, "but I also lost my parents that day. They were never the same. The grief consumed them, and I grew up in a house full of sadness and unanswered questions." Anne Frost, now in her 70s, has said that finally knowing the truth has brought peace. "We always knew Ian Spencer didn't do it," she said. "We never believed he could have, but knowing who actually killed Elsie, knowing it's over, that's something. Not everything we wanted, but something." The ABC steps still exist. They're still there in Wakefield, though the area has changed over the decades. Some visitors leave flowers at the bottom, remembering Elsie. A memorial was placed near the steps. It reads simply, "Elsie Frost, 1951 to 1965, gone but not forgotten. Peter Pickering is dead. He spent most of his adult life in prison for other crimes. He never faced trial for Elsie's murder, never confessed, never showed remorse. But he didn't get away with it. Not really. The truth came out eventually. His name is forever associated with Elsie's death. And he spent over 40 years behind bars. Colin Frost had said Pickering got away with murder, but perhaps the coroner was right. Spending 4 decades in prison means Pickering didn't get away with much. The case serves as a reminder of multiple truths. That tunnel vision in investigations can lead to catastrophic failures. That false accusations destroy innocent lives. That families deserve answers even if it takes 50 years. That evidence should be preserved because technology advances. That cold cases can be solved if people don't give up. And that children deserve protection from predators like Peter Pickering. Elsie Frost went sailing on a Saturday afternoon in October 1965. She helped younger children learn to sail. She laughed with her teacher. She changed out of her sailing clothes and started walking home. She made a small detour to keep her new shoes clean, and she died at the bottom of 26 stone steps, stabbed 5 times by a monster who walked away free for 52 years. But her family never gave up, and eventually the truth came out. Elsie Frost, 14 years old, future head girl, aspiring teacher, beloved daughter and sister, taken from this world far too soon by Peter Pickering's violence and police incompetence, gone but not forgotten.